Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my partner in crime, Weston Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. And Wes, with plenty to talk about, we skipped our earlier episode this week because of all of the roster dust that needed to settle. And wow, this might have been the most active and interesting roster cut-down time in Green Bay in a while, because the Packers emerged from it not only with their initial 53-man roster, but a new kicker, a new backup quarterback, both of whom came from the Tennessee Titans. It's been an interesting last few days around here.
I was joking with a friend of mine because, obviously we're in the 2-cycle-week show for the Unscripted. And I made a crack about whether we would have tried to shoot the show on Monday or Tuesday, we would have had to reshoot it like 3 times.
Yeah, exactly.
Based on every single thing that happened, beginning with the rumors, not the rumors, but the reports of the Malik Willis trade on Monday night. Then Anders Carlson is released. You have Greg Joseph make it to Wednesday, but then the Packers claim Brayden Narveson from the Tennessee Titans. And on and on and on the things go. But I'll say this too, I do my own informal roster selection. I got 49 correct. I really, there were just some things that definitely threw me for a whirl a little bit.
Yeah.
I see not so much the guys that made it, but like the Anthony Johnson Jr.'s, being released, and a couple of the different decisions that happen. And it just, again, goes to show you, Mike, for as much as we watch these practices and watch these games, you cannot get into the minds and into the meeting rooms of the NFL scouts of Brian Gutekunst. They had to make some very, very tough calls. Brian even said it during his news conference earlier this week. They felt like there was more than 53 guys on this roster that deserved to be here. I think the fact that 3 of them got claimed on waivers sort of speaks to that. And now the Green Bay Packers, with what I would argue is probably their most talent-rich team they've had, at least during this era of Brian Gutekunst's tenure as GM, they are stacked and ready to get into the season.
Yeah, I want to get back to those 3 released players by the Packers getting claimed by other teams. But first, let's talk about these 2 new arrivals a little bit. At quarterback, Malik Willis. A couple years ago, he was a 3rd-round draft pick of the Tennessee Titans. He was the 3rd quarterback taken in that draft. It was not the typical quarterback draft in 2022. That spring, Willis was the 3rd quarterback taken. He had begun his college career at Auburn, had ultimately transferred to Liberty University in Virginia, had a couple of highly successful seasons there. And then with the Titans, he ended up getting sort of 3 emergency starts as a rookie, and then things just didn't really work out for him in Tennessee, and there's been a coaching change now. Quite obviously, the Packers felt, after the way things went through this training camp and preseason with Sean Clifford and Michael Pratt, felt they needed to upgrade at backup quarterback, and so Brian Gutekunst traded a 7th-round pick to the Titans to get a new quarterback in here. It's a very interesting situation with the opener coming up so quickly. You wonder, how fast can Willis get up to speed? Can he really be the number 2 quarterback for the opener in Brazil against the Eagles? The fallback is that Sean Clifford is back on the practice squad, so the Packers will have that option as they set the roster for the game in Brazil, depending on how all that shakes out. But a different type of quarterback, a dual threat guy, the kind of guy that the Packers haven't really had around here a whole heck of a lot. But it's a new lease on life in some respects, in some measure of speaking, for Malik Willis, and he's going to help out the Packers at a spot that they need. They need some assurance.
Yeah, I was really big on Willis in 2022. I don't know how much the average fan remembers, but I mean, his draft stock just soared in the months leading up to that, whether it was the NFL scouting combine or just the fact that, it wasn't the most talent-rich draft. So, I mean, we really perseverated a lot on the quarterbacks that were available. Kenny Pickett goes at number 20 to Pittsburgh. Desmond Ridder, who also got released this past weekend, he went in the 3rd round to Atlanta. And then you had Tennessee, I believe, trade up to get Willis. Now, the one thing about his tenure in Tennessee that I never quite understood was I didn't really see what the vision was for him there.
Right.
They had Ryan Tannehill. To me, it almost kind of felt like they got to the third round and he was still there, and hey, we're just, let's take this kid and we'll see what we get and what we develop. They never really committed to it. As you said, there was 3 spot starts. They didn't go great his rookie year. He talked at his locker on Wednesday about how he's a much different quarterback today than he was when he got those opportunities. They drafted Will Levis last season, so then he's basically the de facto number 3.
And Levis was a second-round pick, someone they invested a higher draft pick in than they had invested in Willis.
Yeah. And now for him to, he had a really strong preseason, the best preseason of his career so far, led them in rushing, was a guy that had 107 passer rating. I watched the final clips of those 10 minutes in that game against the Saints. I mean, he made some extraordinary throws. The pass that he had down the right sideline, which if you go back and look at his draft write-up, that was something they felt was really strong with him, his downfield accuracy, particularly to the sidelines. That 34-yard touchdown came off of him leading the receiver in one-on-one coverage. So it's not like he's just a guy that just is going to run. No, I mean, he had a lot of arm talent. He's super intelligent, and you could sense that at this locker, just the way he carries himself and his composure. And I actually think from a personality perspective is going to fit really well with Jordan Love. The challenge is the fact that we are, at the time that we're taping this, 8 days away from the regular season opener in Brazil.
Yeah.
How quickly he can digest this playbook after spending the last 3 years working in Tennessee's system, that's going to be the number one thing he has to figure out. But that being said, athletically, intangible-wise, there's a lot to like about Malik Willis, still only 25 years old, and I really feel like you haven't even opened the box yet of what his potential could be in this league.
Well, it sounds like there is some carryover in terms of the playbook, the scheme from what Willis was learning his rookie year in Tennessee before some things with the offense and the coaching and whatnot started to change there. But the other thing I thought was interesting is Brian Gutekunst specifically made the comment in talking about Willis that in their evaluation of Willis, as they were keeping their eye out for quarterbacks who might come available, for all the talk about Willis and his running ability and being a dual threat guy, Brian Gutekunst said they felt there was a lot of progress made in making plays from the pocket and not just tuck and run and take off with the ball, that the kind of stuff he was doing early in his career, that progress of becoming a pocket passer while still maintaining that dual threat. That type of growth is what really interested the Packers in making this move. So be interesting to see. Obviously, if all goes well, Malik Willis will not be playing for the Green Bay Packers in 2024. That's not the idea here. But the Packers certainly feel they've upgraded themselves at backup quarterback. When it comes to kicker, Anders Carlson, Greg Joseph, entire offseason, all of training camp, other third kickers at various times brought in to be part of the competition as well. It ends up being none of them. The Packers decide to move on. Alex Hale is on the practice squad with the international player exemption, so there is a second kicker in Green Bay. But Brayden Narveson, undrafted rookie, went to Tennessee, was not able to beat out Nick Folk, the veteran, for the job there, and the Packers end up making the claim of Narveson on waivers. He had a very successful preseason. He only missed 1 field goal out of 7 tries, and I believe that was a 58-yarder.
Yep.
He made a 59-yarder. He also made a walk-off. I believe it was 46 yards, a walk-off kick to win a preseason game. So the Packers like the fact that he kind of been in some pressure situations as a rookie in the preseason when he's competing with a veteran to try to unseat a guy for the job. And we're not going to know exactly what the Packers thought of Carlson and Joseph and how all this thing went. Joseph, I thought, started out training camp really strong. Then he hit a rough patch. He seemed to kind of recover toward the end. Carlson, in some respects, was a little steadier in terms of the consistency maybe than Joseph, but the consistent level wasn't a high enough consistent level really when the Packers looked at it. And quite frankly, Wes, it's not about just one kick, but when Carlson went out and missed the 32-yarder in the fourth quarter of the final preseason game against Baltimore, what I said in Insider Inbox is that just felt like a declaration that Anders Carlson was not any better as a kicker in year 2 than he was in year one. And the Packers felt they needed to get better at that position. So if he's not going to prove that he's better, then they're going to look elsewhere to upgrade. So Narveson is the move. A
lot of different things in play here. The one thing I will say, and again, I thought Anders, the way he handled himself in Green Bay, just a total professional from day one. But fact is he makes a 54-yard field goal early in that preseason game, and then in the fourth quarter you miss a 32-yarder. As you venture into the NFL season, and as Matt LaFleur said, he knows how close that razor-thin line is between victory and defeat, and how sometimes the kicking position is factoring into that. You can't have that type of fluctuation. You have to be more consistent. Greg Joseph, I thought, showed an NFL caliber leg. It was a little disconcerting the middle of that camp where he sort of lost the way a little bit. I thought he did finish strong. Yep. I'd be curious to see what opportunities are out for him this season still. And ultimately, a position battle that lasted more than 4 months, it really didn't have a conclusive winner. So what does Brian Gutekunst do? You look at the situation in Tennessee where you had two guys, and Nick Folk at 39 years old still holding on and still holding strong, and you had Narveson, who was the upstart challenger, who kind of is in the same mold of a Christian Welch in that I don't know what more that kid could have done to win the job other than maybe making the 58-yarder. But I mean, he made a 59-yarder. If you look into his bio, he made a 58-yarder in high school. I mean, this guy has been around, and he's been a pretty highly touted kicker for a long time and worked his way up the college ladder to finish things out at NC State. You take a risk bringing in a kicker this late. Matt LaFleur said this is kind of uncharted waters for him in that regard.
Yeah.
And as an undrafted rookie, you're not sure how he's going to respond to, okay, now these are all must-make situations. But all that being said, Packers had to go a different direction. They had the waiver wire at their disposal. They had free agency at their disposal. It's a position where you don't have a playbook, and they felt like Narveson is the right fit for them right now.
Yeah, it's interesting how it unfolded that the Packers ended up making both of these moves with players coming from the same team, and you just wonder exactly how the discussions unfolded. Were the Packers trying to get both in the trade, but then maybe the Titans were asking for too high of a draft pick, so then they just settled, okay, we'll keep the quarterback thing separate. We'll just get that done. We'll see what else happens. And Narveson, the Packers end up getting him for free, essentially off of the waiver wire. So kind of interesting how that unfolded. With regard to the Packers and getting down to the 53, you mentioned that Brian Gutekunst said there were more than 53 guys who were deserving of roster spots, and as it turned out, for the first time in 7 years, not only did the Packers have a released player get claimed, they had 3 of them get claimed. Safety Anthony Johnson Jr. was claimed by the Giants, receiver Grant Dubose by the Miami Dolphins, and offensive lineman Royce Newman by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And that really speaks to the depth the Packers had on this 90-man offseason roster, because there were only, I believe the final number was 26 players claimed across the league. 26 across the entire league out of 800 plus.
Carolina took half of them.
That were on the waiver wire. Yeah, Carolina took a bunch. They took advantage of being at the top of the waiver claim list. I mean, that's what you have to do. If you feel there are better players out there, you got to upgrade your team.
Yeah.
But only 26 were claimed across the league, and 3 of them were claimed off of from the Green Bay Packers cut list. So that says something about what the Packers had in this locker room throughout the offseason, throughout training camp. And let's be honest, too. I mean, that 53 that did make it for Green Bay did not include 2 players who all of us thought would be on the 53, and I'm talking about running back A.J. Dillon and tight end Tyler Davis, both of whom unfortunately end up on season-ending injured reserve. Dillon with the stinger injury, the recurrence of the neck stinger that kept him out of the regular season finale and the playoffs last year. Tyler Davis, after basically a year's worth of rehab from the ACL from the preseason opener in Cincinnati last year, he gets back out on the field in Denver in preseason action, plays roughly a dozen snaps, and injures his shoulder, and now he's out for another season once again. So that was really the bad news and the sad news with regard to the roster decisions. But again, those are 2 players everybody thought would be on the 53, all else being equal, and they weren't. And the Packers filled those spots, so they still have their 53, and 3 guys still got claimed by other teams. So I just, in the bigger picture, you look at that. This offseason roster was very deep and very talented.
Very deep, very talented, and so many guys rose up to the challenge. I think a guy like Christian Welch, again, you could look at him as somebody that was a long shot, even though he was a veteran, and he put himself into the conversation with how he performed in the preseason. Royce Newman, I think everybody would probably agree, Royce, it was time for a change of venue for him and see what can happen now that he gets down in Tampa with kind of a fresh start. The opportunity for the offensive line, where the depth is, wasn't conducive, I think, for him making the roster. But then you have Grant Dubose, who was the only receiver claimed. And I think, again, speaks not only to the depth at receiver, but honestly, Mike, the strength of these last 2 draft classes. The Packers don't find them in a situation of having to release a Dubose or an Anthony Johnson Jr. if there isn't Evan Williams, if there isn't Javon Bullard, if there isn't Malik Heath, and certainly Bo Melton.
Right.
Those type of players are the ones that made this decision very difficult. And on the other side of it, you have guys like Heath, who I thought got stronger throughout the preseason. I thought Brian Gutekunst made a very salient observation when he said this is a guy that just has a unique ability to make the big play. And when you're looking at long-term potential, those type of players, there's something to be said for that, because you can have all the tools, but you might not have that it factor when it's winning time. Malik has that. You saw it last year with Bo Melton, Mike. I mean, Bo needed to have a good camp. It wasn't like he was just guaranteed a roster spot. But you don't have the performance that he had down the stretch last season if you're not talented and if you're not ready for the moment. So for the Green Bay Packers to have this much depth at receiver, that a guy like Grant Dubose, who performed so well throughout camp and really didn't have very many off days, if he's not able to make this roster again, I think is another reminder of just how talented, how deep, and how young the Packers are at many spots on this team.
Yeah, that clutch comment that Gutekunst made about Malik Heath in terms of being able to make a key play at a key time. We saw it last year as a game the Packers lost, unfortunately, but the Monday night game against the Giants, the guy who catches the touchdown pass in the final couple of minutes that gave the Packers a chance to win that game was Malik Heath. It was a tough play at the pylon. The previous play, he had just had what he thought was going to be the touchdown catch, and it just got knocked out of his hands by the defender. Came right back on the next play. It was either 3rd or 4th down. Jordan Love went right back to him, and he makes that touchdown. Those are the kinds of things that stick with decision makers, right? When it comes to you're trying to decide between this guy and that guy. And Grant Dubose, he did everything he could. He was performing on special teams quite well, putting some really good special teams film out there, as well as what he was doing at receiver. Unique situation in Miami for him, because Miami initially only kept 4 wide receivers on its 53. They have Odell Beckham Jr., who is on the PUP list. They have another wide receiver who was put on injured reserve with the designation to return. And then they went and claimed Dubose to essentially be their number 5 receiver for right now, depending on how long it takes those other guys to come back. So a big-time opportunity for him, and hope it goes well. But it's one of those things that you just never know exactly what everybody else's situation is around the league. I think in a perfect world, the Packers would love to have brought Grant Dubose back to the practice squad, but the claim process is out there for a reason. It's for players to get opportunities with other teams, and Dubose is going to get that now.
And I think the one thing that you could tell even when Brian was talking about is, and Matt LaFleur as well, is probably as disappointed as they were not to be able to have Grant. You could have cut Malik Heath or Bo Melton. Both of those guys are getting claimed too. I firmly believe that. There are no what-ifs at that position. We know how talented they are, and there would have been a team like Miami there that is looking for someone when they are that banged up to augment their current roster. And the other aspect of it too is, it's not like this is a team with several older players where, okay, well, Grant, if it doesn't happen this year, could be he was continually going to be fighting this uphill climb against the same exact players for the next 2 seasons, good Lord willing, health-wise. So it is what it is. But again, the fun part about that day, Mike, is the fact, like Malik Heath telling people at his locker, Jason Vrabel, the Packers passing game coordinator, his position coach last year, was the one that called him to let him know he made the team. We talk about an Aaron Mosby on the defensive line that was on the practice squad all of last season. He has not appeared in an actual NFL regular season game in almost 2 years. those are the stories that make you feel good about this. And as much as it hurts to see some guys end up leaving, being able to have that knowledge of how talented this roster is paired with the guys that have some pretty inspiring stories, it makes for a pretty special day.
Yeah, it's funny because we talked before the preseason finale against Baltimore. I wouldn't say it's every year, but there are years where somebody in that final preseason game plays his way onto the 53-man roster. This year, the answer to that question was Aaron Mosby. He went out there, he got the strip sack, which his teammate, Anthony Johnson Jr., scooped up and ran for a touchdown. He also dropped into coverage and intercepted a pass. Packers loaded up on the defensive line. They have a lot of depth at both interior D-line and on the edges. And but that, at a premier position at edge rusher, you show that kind of promise and that kind of potential. And the Packers knew, they know the growth that Mosby has made that entire first year, is spending his entire undrafted rookie year on the practice squad. He makes it now. And hats off to Bo Melton, his third crack at trying to make an initial 53. Obviously, he's played in NFL games. He's got statistics to his name, made some big plays for the Packers down the stretch last year. But this was the time of year that he was always getting the bad news and end up, going onto a practice squad or making his way from Seattle to Green Bay, whatever the case might be. He's on the 53 now to start the season, and that's pretty exciting for that young man.
Yeah, and you could just see what it means to that locker room to have Bo Melton in there. I think I've used the analogy a couple times before. I mean, he is the heartbeat of that receiving core. He might not be the guy that's getting the 50 snaps a game, but he's one of these straws that stir that drink and make what this team is pretty special. And just the way he's dealt with us and his professionalism since the day he signed off of Seattle's practice squad. I'll never forget that, talking to him for the first time in the locker room and just basically just being hopeful for an opportunity, understanding on paper he has 4.34 speed, but he has to play that out on an actual playing surface. And I thought last year he did that. He mentioned when I talked to him after the game on Saturday, he got the 18-yard touchdown. It had been a training camp filled with some ups and downs, but he felt like there were more ups. And I think the Packers agreed with that as well. And there are certain intangibles with him that I think just make it so that you can't risk losing that player again like the Packers did last season. They were fortunate he lasted as long as he did on the practice squad. They were able to elevate him and then sign him in December. And it was a big part of them having the run that they had. So yeah, kudos to Bo. He's gone about it the right way and ultimately got a huge reward from it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, I've waited a little too long to take care of sponsors.
Yeah, get me paid.
I'm not going to wait any longer here, Wes. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousins Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousins Subs, 50-plus years of better. All right, well, you mentioned it earlier in the show. The kickoff in Brazil against the Philadelphia Eagles is 8 days away, which is hard to process right now. But that being said, the Packers are turning the page. They are starting their full-fledged prep for the season opener, and that includes a practice, actually. Matt LaFleur informed the media the Packers will be practicing Thursday night under the lights at Lambeau Field, sort of spending their Thursday mimicking what game day next Friday in Brazil is going to be. They're going to have some morning meetings and sort of like that walkthrough type of stuff. Then the players will get a little bit of a break, and then they're going to come out under the lights for what sounds like it's going to be a pretty high-intensity practice at Lambeau Field. It's a closed practice. We won't be there. There won't be any cameras or photographers there. But this is what's always so interesting to me is that you go through that last preseason game. You've still got the 90 guys on the roster. You have to make all these decisions. This year it included a trade and a waiver claim, both at very, very significant spots on the roster. And then with the Packers not having until that first Sunday of the regular season, the fact that their first game is on a Friday and we'll be traveling to Brazil a couple of days before that, it's all happening pretty fast here, Wes. And that opening night kickoff for Green Bay against the Eagles is going to be here before we know it.
There are so many things I've taken issue with, the 17-game schedule and all these different things the NFL has done with tinkering with the league and the outlook the last few years. I will put on record, I will be on video saying I absolutely love the fact that they have this mini bye or whatever you want to call it before the opener.
Absolutely.
It adds so much to not only trying to keep rosters healthy, but it allows coaches like Matt LaFleur to try to do some interesting stuff this week. You would never do this if the Green Bay Packers were playing in 6 or 7 days. You would do this if you have an extra day or two to kind of, see where you're at with your roster, get guys comfortable, and also get them acclimated to not necessarily the time change or any of those type of things, but the fact that you now need to prepare a young football team for primetime action in an international site in week 1.
Yeah.
That's what the Green Bay Packers are doing. And I think, as many challenges as this is going to be, and we're going to have to get through it. In a lot of ways, the Packers are the guinea pig for this thing in terms of just the amount of travel that is going to go into this before playing a high-stakes matchup where you only have 17 of them. That is going to be a huge challenge. But it also is a major opportunity. I think it's a major opportunity to put this team on display for the entire country, the entire viewing public, and also a guy like Jordan Love, who is now really put himself out there now as one of the faces of this league with the contract that he got and the way that he played down the stretch last season. That's all very exciting. And honestly, Mike, so much of this is going to be a day-to-day. Just how is this going to play out? What is this going to be like? And Matt LaFleur and his coaching staff are trying to do their best they can to sort of predict that.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and we'll talk about this more next week leading up to the matchup itself, but you look at these two franchises that are meeting in this inaugural game in Brazil to open the season. The Packers are a team that, they made this huge transition last year, not only at quarterback, which obviously was the headliner, but with all these other young players on offense around him. It's been this ongoing transition to where a lot of struggles early in the year, then you hit your stride late in the year, you make the playoffs and you make a run and you come within an eyelash of getting to the NFC Championship game. And now the Packers are looking to build on that and keep their arrow pointing up, right? The Philadelphia Eagles are coming into this where a couple years ago, they were the NFC champions. They were in the Super Bowl, and they lose a heartbreaking Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs. They come back the following year, and everybody's saying, what Super Bowl hangover? The Philadelphia Eagles are 10-1. They're looking like they're going to be the number 1 seed in the NFC again. Then the adversity hits and things start to snowball the wrong way, and then they end up losing their division to the Dallas Cowboys. They get in as a wild card, but they are one and done in the playoffs. And now coming off of that, everybody is wondering just where are the Philadelphia Eagles headed? Two very, very different narratives about two teams that in their own way and at different times have been standard bearers within the NFC. Yep. But the narratives around these two clubs right now, heading into week 1 of 2024, couldn't be more different.
No, and it's interesting too, and the Green Bay Packers are 9-8, and they squeak into the playoffs and look as good as they did in Dallas against the number 1 seed, and then conversely, number 2 seed, excuse me.
Yeah.
Then you look over on this other side of things, and it's the Philadelphia Eagles, who for a time there looked like they were going to be the number 1 seed. They fall off during the final half of the season, and now they're suddenly in a position where they have questions to answer. Nick Sirianni has questions to answer going into this year. Jason Kelce is no longer there at center. What's the future of the tush push? I mean, that's all those type of things that you're going to have to kind of work through.
That up.
I had to do it. I had to do it.
Bring that up. Come on now.
But all jokes aside, there's a lot out there yet for Philadelphia. And when you get San Francisco's going through it too, man. When you get that close to greatness, immortality, legacy, and you fall short, it sticks with you. And I think both of those franchises in a lot of ways, and especially with the Eagles, with how things went at the tail end of last season, it's a very important game for them coming out of the box.
And it's a reminder, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, throughout the course of the 2024 season. But what happened to both the Packers and the Eagles last year and how their seasons unfolded, it is a reminder of how much of a marathon this 17-game gauntlet is. Yeah. Because after 9 games, the Packers were 3-6. After 11 games, the Eagles were 10-1. And look at where those two teams were in the middle of January. They were in completely different, like polar opposite type of situations from where they had been just a couple of months earlier. So just a reminder, something to keep in mind, and we'll talk about it more next week.
The dangerous thing about having a 7 seed, Michael, is it isn't necessarily the 7th best team in your conference.
Right.
And the Green Bay Packers, how they finished that year was very different than how they played the first 6-7 weeks of the year.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the Dallas Cowboys are on the receiving end of it.
Well, fortunately for the Packers.
Fortunately for the Packers.
Fortunately for Cowboys fans.
And Jerry Jones.
With that, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team heading into week 1 and off to Brazil. We will have more Packers Unscripted next week as well. We've got it all for you on Packers.com. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.